Hi, my name is Yannis. I have worked for 15 years as a trader and a so-called quant for major financial institutions around the world in the equities, interest rate, and hybrid derivatives desk. This experience has motivated me to develop a software that enables me and you to price and analyze financial derivatives in the spreadsheet. This software is basically an Excel add-in, which is called Deriscope, which you can download and use it for free from the respective website. So let me show you in this video how you can also use Deriscope in Excel. I'm going to start an Excel session. I'm using Excel 2007. And as you see, when Excel first starts, a task pane, also called wizard, appears on the right hand side. This is because I have already installed Deriscope in my computer. At this stage, Deriscope is not enabled, so I cannot really use it. I have first to press on the start button here, and that brings Deriscope to a stage where it can be used. Deriscope consists of two parts. The first part is that one function called ds, which is made available and can be used on the spreadsheet. Let's use it right now. I select an empty cell and I simply type equal ds and empty parentheses. It worked, although some sort of an error has appeared, which is quite expected due to the fact that no input parameters have been supplied inside the ds formula. Let's go to the second part of Deriscope, which is what you see on the right, this kind of the wizard here, or the task pane. This is actually the playground of the most important operations that you're going to do in Excel when you use Deriscope. But in order to show you the value of this wizard, let me first try to price a very simple financial product, a zero bond, without using the wizard. So I'm going to hide the wizard by clicking here. So it's not going to be used. And let me open a spreadsheet that I have already prepared to keep the timing short of this demonstration. This spreadsheet has no formulas in it. It's only colors, formatting. So if you click around, there is nothing inside apart from text and these four numbers here. What this spreadsheet applies is the input parameters that are required in order to price a zero bond. What is a zero bond? A zero bond is a financial contract that promises its holder a certain amount of money that is to be paid at some future point of time. In this case, that future point of time is called maturity and has been set to a year from now, at the date of 22nd of July 2018. Today's date is 22nd of July 2017. And the amount to be received, I have entered here 1 million euros. In order to calculate the present value of that contract, by that I mean the amount of money that I have to pay today in order to receive 1 million euros in a year from now, I also need to specify the so-called yield or interest rate, and I'm setting here to some fixed value of 4%. So here are my input data, and here is the request, which where you see the question mark, I have to fill up this cell with the amount that I have to pay today, which is the present value of that zero bond contract. Okay, how am I going to do that using Deriscope? In most financial packages that you might have seen, usually you have at your disposal spreadsheet functions with long names, for example something like calculate price of zero bond, and then you have to go here at that cell, let's say, and type equal that big long name function, and then you pass the input parameters, the maturity and the amount, the notional, and then the output is spit out. Okay, but let's do it in the proper way, which is actually being done when you are dealing not with a very simple case such as the zero bond, but with much more complex financial derivatives. So in the most general case, you have to proceed into two steps. In the first step, the step number one, you have to first create an object that will describe the financial product at question. We do that here. We want to create that object in that cell here. So I select the cell B11 and I type in the Deriscope function. I know the syntax already, so I have to type in ds parentheses. First, inside quotes, I have to give the name of the function I'm going to use, which is create, followed by the second parameter, which is the type of the financial product I would like to create. In this case is zero bond. Followed by the input parameters that effectively define that zero bond. The first one will be the so-called maturity. The Deriscope syntax requires a suffix of an equal sign at the end. I do that. The value of maturity I have to link to that cell up here. And the last parameter will be the so-called notional, again with an equal sign. And I link the value to that cell here to the 1 million euros. Close parentheses and hit enter. Okay, Deriscope has just created a zero bond object, and here on that cell B11 you see the output, which is a so-called handle name. It's a piece of text, zero bond B11 to 1, that acts as a reference to the object held inside Excel memory, which object basically is a representation of the zero bond contract. Okay, now that I have created that object, let me select this cell underneath, B13, and enter now another Deriscope function, which will calculate the dirty price of that contract. So I type ds. In this case now, the function I'm going to use, as I said, is called dirty price, followed by the handle name of the zero bond contract that I have just created. So I have to link to that cell here, the cell B11. And the next parameter, required actual parameter, is the yield that I assume it holds in this case. So the yield, it's entered with have to link here with the 4% cell here. So that's it. I close parenthesis, hit return, and the Deriscope formula, this formula here, has returned the dirty price output, which has been calculated to equal 961,640 euros. There are three major problems with this approach. First one is the so-called syntax problem. What I mean by syntax problem is the fact that in order to carry out any kind of operation, you need to type a formula like this, for example. This is where I have created the zero bond object. And this formula has certain syntax conventions, which you can observe here in the formula bar. It's very difficult to remember these conventions. Even if you memorize it for the case of a zero bond, for example, you have to enter a text called maturity or not expiry or something else, and something called here notional and not principal or another kind of possibility. Even if you can memorize that for the zero bond, it's very difficult to keep everything in mind for when you're dealing with complex financial derivatives. Imagine you have a crazy structure like an inflation-linked bond convertible into equity, which eventually takes hundreds of input parameters, and then you truly run crazy in order to write down all these functions on the spreadsheet. So syntax problem is a major problem which actually hampers most, if not all, of the financial packages out there. So the second problem is a so-called information problem. To demonstrate that information problem, let's look at this function here, where we have calculated the dirty price. And you see it takes, for example, an input parameter called yield. Assuming that you have passed successfully the syntax problem and you know you have to enter yield, the question arises, what do we mean by yield in a precise fashion? That's a very, very big question, and I have to tell you from my own professional experience. People strive to deal with that. What they do is look up the manual if they have one, or more often calling the person, the author of the spreadsheet, and ask him in these kind of questions how yield is exactly defined in this context. The third problem is the diagnostics problem. To demonstrate the diagnostics problem is let's bring the spreadsheet in a situation where a wrong output is being produced. It's very easy to do that. I just go to maturity and I change the 22nd of July to the 42nd of July. Such a date does not exist and should produce all sorts of errors. Nothing happens because, okay, Excel is in manual calculation mode. Let me change that quickly. Up here, formulas, calculation options, and set it to automatic. Okay, you see now as expected that there are errors appearing in the output cells here and here. And the problem with these errors is that they do not supply any information of with regard to the cause of the error. So you see an error, you know something went wrong, you don't see a number here, an output, but you have no idea where it came from. Even if in this case it looks very simple, imagine in a real world situation where you have several spreadsheets open and the input, let's say to that formula, is coming from another worksheet, from data buried inside hundreds of rows of other data that can take you hours, perhaps even more than that, to locate perhaps a very stupid data entry that has resulted in that faulty output. Okay, let me now do the same task again, so calculate the dirty price of the bond, this time using a wizard. Before I do that, let me revert to the previous setup I have here with the date, so I have correct numbers. I start with correct input, and let me expand the task pane, the wizard, and in order to price a zero bond here, I have to basically provide my choices, make my selections within the wizard area here. A few words about this Deriscope wizard. It consists of three parts. The top part is the so-called input area. The input area consists of three rows. The top row here is the so-called type selector. This is where you make your type selections. This is where we are going to select the type of zero bond. The row underneath is the so-called object selector, which you are not going to use very often. And the last row is the function selector, which is important because this is where you choose the function that you would like to apply. Underneath the input area, you have, it appears to be a very, very small area here. This is called the browse area, that is designed to hold the input parameters to whatever function you have selected in the function selector above here. In this case, not much is shown here for the simple reason that no function has been so far selected. And the last area on the bottom is the so-called info area, which is where text messages from Deriscope to you are displayed. Okay, let me go to the type selector and try to locate the zero bond type. I would not be able to find that because the so-called here viewing filter has been set to equity. I will click to change that into interest rate. Okay, and then I click on this little arrow here, and I see my choices under type, which is data, market, model. You see, as I move down the mouse, there is a respective information text appearing in the info area. And let me choose tradable. Under tradable, I do the same thing again. You see, you have the several tradable types. I'm going to select the top one called bond. And finally, under bond, the last one is the zero bond. This is what I'm looking for. By the way, when my mouse is over the zero bond field, you see a short description of the zero bond underneath in the info area. So what you know basically what the zero bond is. Okay. You see in the function selector, the function create has been displayed. This is by default the case because this is what you most usually want to do when after you have selected a type. You want to create an object of that type. In the browse area here, you see the input parameters that are required by that function create in the context of a zero bond always. And this input parameter appears to be something called maturity. So the cell on the left is a so-called key. It's the maturity of the zero bond, and the cell on the right with the blue color entry is the value of the maturity, which you can change even if you want right here. It's set by default to 5 years from now, so the date here is 22nd of July 2022. Because I would like to also enter a notional value for that zero bond, and the non-notional is displayed here, I have to click on that little button to change the visibility of the optional parameters from false to true, so make all optional parameters visible. Well, you see there are a lot of them. If you click on any of them, you can see respective information appearing on the info area underneath. Let me go to the notional and change the default value of 100 and make it 1 million. Okay. I do not want to paste all that in the spreadsheet. It will take a lot of space, and for the purpose of this demonstration here, we want to keep things simple. So let me click on that button again so I keep only the optional parameters. In this case now it's notional and maturity. And I select a cell here, the cell B16 on the spreadsheet, and go back to my wizard, click on Go and then Paste Function. That has pasted just a regular spreadsheet function, the DS function of course, in that cell. If you click on the formula bar, you see the input to that function. Now it's much simpler. It's just a single range consisting of 2 columns and 4 rows that provide the required information, which is the type, the function, the notional, and the maturity. Now, since I have created a zero bond object, that's a handle name here, I want to calculate the dirty price. How can I do that using the wizard? Very simple. I select first that cell. You see, when I select that cell, the contents of that zero bond appear in the browse area here. So you know what this particular zero bond contract contains in all possible detail. And then I go to this button, Go button, in the wizard. And no, sorry, I don't have to do that. First, I have to select an empty cell where I would like to paste the dirty price function. Then I have to go to the function selector here And here you see all functions that are available from Deriscope with regard to the zero bond object selected. I'm going to scroll down and select the dirty price. By the way, you see as you move around the mouse, you see description of each function, what exactly it does. So I select dirty price. And now I'm ready to go to the Go button and say paste function. That's done. So the function that has been pasted, this time on the cell B22, I can click here, so you see it takes one single range input, again very simple. And when this function is being calculated, the output is produced. Well, this output now it's 833,000. It's different than the other one. Well, because we're using a different notional, no, the same notional but different maturity date, which is up to the 2022. Let me link this input to the original one, so we have the same source data. So I link that to here, and I'm linking that date to this cell. Okay. Now you see it's of course the same output, like it must be 961,640. Okay, how the three problems that I have mentioned before when we used, remember here in the first solution, when we used the DS formula without the wizard, how these three problems are alleviated now that I'm using the Deriscope wizard. Well, the first problem, if you remember, was the syntax problem. Obviously, this is gone because now this function here is simply pasted on the spreadsheet by the wizard. Imagine you have something, again, very complex, this inflation-linked bond I mentioned earlier, and the wizard will paste the required function with the correct syntax, with sensible default values on the spreadsheet in a split of a second. So there is no syntax problem to worry about. The second problem was the information problem. Remember before, when we calculated the dirty price, we have to enter a yield entry. And we asked ourselves the question, what do we mean by yield? Well, if you click on the spreadsheet here, on the yield, on the cell here, the cell B25, containing the yield key. I do that now. You see the info area inside the task pane, a text is displayed that informs the user how the yield is defined. When you see, I can make that a little bit bigger if I click here. If you see a blue color, this is a hyperlink. You can, it's like change pages in a book. You can click here on the 0 rate, and then you see much more information. And then you can click on frequency, and you see more information, and you can navigate back and forth. You see this arrow. Okay. Bring back to the normal stage. It used to be like that. Perfect. So the information problem has been resolved, and the last problem, if you remember, was the diagnostics problem. Let's repeat the situation here, where we had not this one, but we had the maturity date changed to the 22, make it 42. So this date does not exist. It should produce an error, so I hit enter. Well, an error has produced, but in this case now, clicking on that error, if I have the wizard, the task pane here open, expanded, I will see information in this info area that will tell me what has caused that error. In this case, you can read the function name dirty price within class error. Okay, it's not recognized. This is why this, if you see inside the formula here, the text input the B11 cell, and the B11 cell here contains an error. So this text error goes inside here, and of course it's very sensible what this message tells you, that you cannot operate the dirty price function on a handle name, which the name of the handle name is called error. Such a handle name, of course, cannot represent a sensible financial product. But if you click on that cell here, the cell B11, which is actually the first occurrence of that error, you see a different message. Failed to process the value associated with key maturity. Expected date, but received 42nd of 07/2018. So immediately you know what the root of the error is. So you go to the 42nd here and you change that to a sensible date like we had before, 22nd, and the error is gone. You don't need to spend hours and hours to try to find out what has caused the error. So that has brought me to the end of this talk today. There are too many features still in Deriscope that perhaps I will put a few more videos in the future, try to expand on them. But for the time being, this is the basic functionality that Deriscope provides. So thanks for watching and bye-bye.